I guess you talked also about fear and anxiety, and I think that is obviously, in our current society, it's just so predominant. There's so much fear, anxiety seems to be everywhere, and I don't know, is it growing in terms of that more and more people do experience fear compared to, let's say, 50, 100 years ago, or is that just my personal impression?
No, I mean, statistically, it's definitely growing. And it is the epidemic of the 21st century. I mean, people, doctors, for example, talk about that 50 to 75% of their patients suffer from fear and anxiety. The doctor visits are often because people have some kind of, symptoms or problems related to stress and anxiety. It's said that 18 to 20% of Americans are diagnosed with anxiety disorder, and the numbers are rising. Now, I think there are many reasons why we have more anxiety, and
Yeah,
part of
can
it
you
is,
talk about that? I think that would be interesting on a big picture point of view, societal
yeah.
kind of view. Why is that?
Well, when we think about what causes us anxiety, one of the things is, of course, like we said, the subconscious trying to, do these patterns of protection. That's often at the bottom of anxiety. We are looking for some potential danger. Now, 100 years ago, life was very small for most people. It was very controllable. You
And very simple,
knew.
also very
And
simple. Yeah.
absolutely. And so now our lives become much bigger. We are all globally connected. Constantly we are hearing about, catastrophes there and terrorist act there. So the worldview has completely changed. And, obviously our subconscious, that takes everything as reality. Whether you're watching some horrible catastrophe in India, or is something that happened in Australia, and you're sitting in Germany, it doesn't matter. Your subconscious feels like, oh my God, this is real. This is what happens and could happen to me. So since the subconscious cannot really decide and discern between fiction and reality, between what is right now in front of you and what you just have experienced through watching TV, the subconscious believes the world is a more and more dangerous place. So that's one reason. We just are bombarded with too much information. The other problem with that is that our subconscious never has a time to actually empty itself. Like in
Hmm.
dreams, for example, is one way for the subconscious to let go and to
Right.
reboot. We don't do this anymore. We are basically filling our subconscious also, when we have time off. We are, sitting on Facebook, we are watching
Yeah.
TV, we are doing things, and the subconscious has, who processes all this information way more than we are consciously aware of, is like a sponge, filling up, filling up, filling up. And, at some point, it just is overflowing. And that can also create a certain sense of overwhelm and uneasiness on the subconscious level. A third reason is, I believe, that we are in much more stressful lives. The demands in the workplace are higher. I think also the way people are treated in the workplace is different. There is a much more inhumane way of dealing with people. You are really not that important. I mean, I constantly talk to people that had problems at work or got fired after 30 years being very loyal workers, simply because they don't really fit in anymore, or the company needs to make cuts. I mean,
Hmm.
it is an environment where, as a person, you just don't feel as valued, and therefore also not as safe. And one last reason I want to mention is certainly that we are not eating well. Many people don't have, because they have a stressful, busy life, don't have breakfast, which is a catastrophe because your blood sugar is, way low. And you can imagine, if the subconscious is here to keep you safe and you have a low blood sugar, it freaks out. It says,
Yeah.
that's a very evolutionary desire to, be nourished. And if you don't nourish yourself, your subconscious is feeling in danger, and gets, of course, in a stress, fight and flight mode. And then, often we eat junk food, nothing really, that keeps us healthy and that provides the nervous system what it really needs. So these are some of the major reasons that have changed in the last 50 to 100 years and contribute certainly to having more anxiety.
So, Dr. Schaub, I have a question because it's wonderful that you have both backgrounds from a traditional medicine, a medical point of view, and the psychotherapeutic point of view. The two questions. First of all, a lot of people I think are afraid to be considered psycho or be a psychiatric case, meaning they usually don't want to be put into that corner, right? And then the second aspect is, can you talk a little bit about the traditional medicine point of view of treating these kind of anxiety disorders? And as you probably know, the new DSM-5 is just has been coming out, the new manual, and it seems like all these psychological health issues, they're expanding so much. So if I'm moving outside the norm, then I'm considered to have a psychological disorder. Can you talk about these two things?
Well, it's interesting, like that you mentioned this because, the norm becomes smaller and smaller because everything obviously is labeled. I mean, at some point, we're going to have a social media depression or something also as a disorder. I'm not a big fan of diagnosing, and I'm not a big fan of putting these labels onto people. Often, unfortunately, these diagnoses are simply a description of the symptom without really knowing where it comes from. And the problem is when people have a label and a diagnosis, often they tend to identify themselves with that. And whatever we identify ourselves with, that's what we focus on. So that's.
But isn't there also the other problem? Because some of my clients and people I know, if they don't get a diagnosis, they are also frustrated because they go to a doctor and they say, well, you're physically healthy. But no, I don't feel healthy, they say.
Right.
I have something, but I just don't know what it is. And then at some point they get some kind of diagnosis and they say, oh, now I finally know what I have.
I know.
Isn't there both cases? And what's
Yeah,
the third
absolutely.
way? What's the third way?
Well, I mean, I think the third way would be to not look at the body or the mind as something that is flawed, but really look at it as a way that, a system that has been evolving and developing through hundreds of thousands of years in a very efficient and almost perfect way. So let's say, for example, anxiety. You have anxiety, you feel, constantly afraid. If you get diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, the next step happens is that the doctors say, well, why don't you take an anxiety medication, something that puts a lid onto this anxiety. The problem is it doesn't resolve it. The analogy that I like to use is pain. If you have pain, you go to the doctor and say, my foot really hurts. And the doctor said, oh, no problem, we're going to give you a pain medication. Doesn't do anything else, doesn't realize that there is maybe, a broken bone in there or that you have a nail sticking in there, but it just says, here, let's suppress here the pain. It's going to be okay. It doesn't really resolve the root causes. And that's a problem with most of those, disorders like anxiety disorder or panic disorder, that the symptom is maybe suppressed, but the root cause is not addressed. And then, people come to me and say, well, you know what? Now I'm taking this medication for a long time. I don't like the side effects. I feel there is a certain dependency on the medication. I don't feel as anxious. It works, but I still don't feel that I'm safe in the world. I still don't feel good enough. And so whatever was driving on a deeper level their anxiety hasn't really changed. The problem in our society right now is that everybody wants to be fixed because it's not okay to have this weakness of anxiety or, just not really fitting in this way. And therefore, people want to really have something that helps them right away. And studies show that the number of people that go actually and get further, psychotherapy treatment or anything that will help them to really address what is the root of their anxiety is dramatically going down. Well, the numbers of people taking medication has been, skyrocketing in the last 10 years. So that is certainly a tendency that's a little concerning.
And why do you believe is that there is not the willingness or motivation to really address the issues? Is that partly because it seems like a quick fix, it seems like a good solution, which at the end, as you said, with the side effects, it might not be that you might have, more side effects, that it might be you have to take the
Right.
medication your whole life, you know.
Yeah.
Why is that people are reluctant to really address the issues?
Well, I think anxiety, especially, is such a disempowering emotion. People just feel so overwhelmed, attacked by it. They feel, that there is this weight sitting on them. It's a feeling of something is done to me. Get it out of me. Get rid of it. And, so that's a big misunderstanding about anxiety. And then, unfortunately, most, even in psychotherapy, the intention of, how to deal with anxiety is to get rid of it, and not to understand more. So why do we have this anxiety? What is actually the root and the source of the anxiety, which we just said, it's a subconscious mind. And how can we actually understand that this anxiety is not your enemy, that this anxiety doesn't try to hurt you, but there is something that tries to tell you. You and I, have certainly worked with people that had chronic illnesses, and they needed to understand that the message of the illness isn't like, well, sorry, I'm just going to make you miserable for a while. The message is, you haven't paid attention. You can metaphorically see what the symptoms are. You can understand the localization of the illness as actually giving you pointers on what is the deeper root cause of the illness. And that's the same with emotions. We can look at the emotions and we can try to decipher their meaning. And then you can actually see these emotions actually are here trying to help you and help you to grow and to become whole again. And then you don't see anxiety anymore as an enemy. You see it actually as a catalyst, and certainly as an ally in many ways.